All right, welcome to Monday, August 8th, Planning and Development Committee meeting. We have a quorum, and so we will proceed with the meeting, starting off with approval of the minutes. So this is approval of minutes of the regular Planning and Development Committee meeting of July 25th, 2022. Can I have a motion for approval, please?
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of July 25.
I'll second.
All right, any changes, discussion?
I'm going to be abstaining since I was not at the meeting.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, changes? All right, hearing none, we'll do a roll call on this because there'll be one abstention.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Vell.
Abstain.
Councilmember Reed.
All right, the minutes pass. Moving on to public comment. Is there anyone in person that would like to make a public comment? All right. And I will go with those committee members who signed up online, starting with Mike Vasilko. Was it 2 minutes?
Yes.
Mike
Thank
Vasilko
you.
with 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just two comments on P1. I really don't see the benefit of establishing a precedent to reduce the fine for somebody who did work without a building permit, regardless of who it is, because then you're going to be in a position to have to do this for other people and other corporations. So I would encourage you to vote no on P1. On D1, I know this is just for discussion, but it seems like the amount that is being discussed it would be prudent to do an RFP for that work. I don't know how proprietary it is, but I'd encourage a RFP for D1. Thank you very much.
All right, next up we have Ed Walsh with 2 minutes. Ed Walsh. All right, moving on to Sue Loback with 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Sue Lolbach with Connections for the Homeless. And I just wanted to speak in support of using a Fuse Executive Fellow to help design a program for advancing equity through affordable housing. Joining forces, our advocacy program at Connections has been advocating for an actionable affordable housing plan for the city for years. And this Fuse Fellowship could be a huge step forward that could help the city take several critical steps. One, the project would focus on and quantify the most urgent areas of need, not just the areas that are sort of the low-hanging fruit, the easiest to implement. Two, the project would tie together the many affordable housing efforts underway and prioritize where the city should spend its energy and resources. Three, the project will identify and go after funding to support affordable housing efforts beyond what the city can do with its current resources. And four, the project will create mechanisms for implementation that will assure that this is a plan of action with accountabilities and results built in. Given the urgency of the affordable housing need, the city should not wait to take action until staffing is replenished and a comprehensive plan is completed. Whatever comes from the work that the Fuse Fellow does will only serve to support new staff who are trying to solve the city's housing problems, accelerate the completion of the housing portion of a new comprehensive plan, and serve those who are struggling with housing sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, and then we'll go back to Ed Walsh if he is rejoined the Zoom. Is Ed Walsh with us? No. Okay. All right, seeing no one else would like to make public comment, we will move on to item P1. Can someone move item P1, please?
I will.
I move approval of P1, consideration of a building permit fine reduction for integrated facility solutions.
Second.
All right, moved by Councilmember Ravel, seconded by Councilmember Reed. Any discussion? Oh, I didn't see, thanks. Councilmember Ravel.
Okay. Yes, so this is a request for a reduction in the building permit fine for the contractor that worked at 1000 Central Street, which is a medical building operated by North Shore University Health System. The permit applications were made during summer of 2021, and as you remember, we had an overload of permit applications, and we had a staffing shortage, so it was really difficult for people to get their permits processed. The contractor, unfortunately, did begin the work before the permit was issued, but he did make good faith efforts to get the permits, obtained the required inspections, paid the fees, and he was doing the work for an entity that was at the center of our pandemic, combating the pandemic. So I support this request from the contractor that the permit fines be reduced to $2,500 per offense for a total of $5,000.
Councilmember Reed.
And I just want to also acknowledge that Councilmember Hedikotis is on Zoom. So I thank you, Councilmember Ravel, for stating what the situation is, and I understand that maybe in 2021 our permit desk was running a bit behind, but I don't know where this would fly elsewhere, where if you haven't been given, if someone said I applied for a FOID card and we find that person, an officer pulls them over and they're driving down the street with what would be a legal gun in their car, I don't think they get to say, well, hey, the state office is taking too long to issue my license here, and so we're going to reduce the fine for them. And so I do think that they knew what the rules were, and they should have followed them. And I think that the taxpayers are owed the full fine amount.
Councilmember Nusma.
Excuse me, I had to do some reverse math here, but by my math, the permit fees, had they been paid, the permit fees were paid on time, totaled $19,564. And the penalty, which is 75% of that number, adds an additional $14,673. And so they're asking to turn that $14,673 penalty into a $5,000 penalty. Am I tracking the math correctly there?
I believe you are.
All right, which means $9,673 is what the difference is, which is hardly going to break our bank, hardly going to break their bank. But I just, a few minutes ago, voted to not help out a homeowner to the tune of a much larger dollar amount. So to be consistent with that, I'm going to oppose this resolution.
Councilmember Reed.
And just in closing, I just want to note that I've had a horrific story from a resident who applied for a permit to replace their water line, and their water was shut off for several days waiting on permits. And the gentleman expressed to me that luckily his mother-in-law lives down the street, and so him and his family were able to kind of curry back and forth between the mother-in-law's house while their water was off and while they were following the rules. God forbid, he said that it had been my reversed, where my mother-in-law was the person without the water. And unless we're going to make a policy decision that, hey, if you haven't gotten your permit yet, you can just go ahead and do whatever construction you want, then, and maybe if that's an equal bar set across the board, I'd be more willing to support that. But again, I'm a no vote on this particular reduction. Thank you.
Councilmember Newsom.
We do have rules in place, and I was just talking with Manager Schnur about this earlier. For emergency situations where water, in what conditions constitute an emergency, which would allow work to proceed as long as a permit was applied for, work could proceed without yet having received the permit.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. Angel Schnur, Building and Inspection Services Manager. An emergency constitutes the repair of already existing services. So for example, if you have water service that is broken and you're no longer getting water service, so you can't wash your dishes or sanitize your stuff, if you have a sewer lateral that's broken and you need to repair that because you don't have sewer services, that's an emergency situation. Emergency situations are allowed to take place. You have to apply for the permit within 24 hours of that emergency service happening. So for example, if you had an emergency on a Sunday, you would have to come in Monday and apply for your permit. The items that we're talking about here were not emergency situations. They had applied for the permit and began the work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Ravel.
Mary Alvarado from North Shore Hospital, I believe, is on the line, and she's just sent me a text saying that the projects were approved before the work started, so I'm a little confused about what the memo says.
Can anybody walk us through this quickly and all the important dates? Thank you.
So there were permits that were applied for, and the permit process is you apply for your permit. You may get an email from our plan reviewer saying the permit is approved, but we have other additional documentation that we need in order to issue the permit. So just because your plans have been approved doesn't necessarily mean the permit is issued and approved. In these particular situations, they had applied for the permits. They had reached out to staff to try and figure out where the slowdown was and what was taking so long. As you know, we were understaffed last summer and inundated with building permits, and so that was why it was taking a longer time for them to get their permits. Once the permits were issued, within a week of issuance, they were calling for building inspections. So we know the work to, or we believe the work to have taken place prior to permit issuance, but we are also very understanding of the circumstances and the work that they do at North Shore.
But Angel, this probably happens a lot though, right? Between, residential work and other work, it's likely that people start projects.
It's true.
Yeah, all the time.
We have work without permits all the time.
Yeah.
We have the same situation where they get the email that the plans were approved, but they don't have the permit issued yet, and they think it's okay to do the work. It happens frequently.
So if we approve this, somebody else could come forward also and say, hey, look, I also requested permits during this period and.
Conceivably, yes.
Okay. All right. Any other? Councilmember Kelly.
Can communication be clarified that just because plans are approved doesn't mean the permit is issued?
We can absolutely include better clarification on the plans approval email that goes out.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that might prevent problems like this from happening.
Councilmember Kelly, did you have your light
So,
on?
I do think, and I know I'm not blaming anybody, but I think when there are tremendous delays in permitting, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea that there is a price paid by us. I mean, I think in the sense that these fines either are waived or reduced due to, really, really tremendous delays in permitting. And I've heard a lot of stories about, complaints with permitting. So I do wonder if this wouldn't be good to pass this in order to set a precedent and to try to establish some guidelines by which we're held to a certain bar in terms of getting permits out. So I agree it should be across the board. It shouldn't just be for North Shore University Health Systems, but I think it is worth looking at considering something. And I understand that they started work without the actual permit, though it was later permitted. But I do think we should have some sort of a system in place so that were held to accountability in terms of getting permits out, and it seems to me that this could be one way to approach that.
If I may,
Yeah.
that's why we recommended the reduction, because we are aware of our fault in the issue of getting the permits out to them. We know that they did apply in a timely manner. They were going through the review process, and the work that they do at North Shore and in our community is important to us, which is why we recommended the reduction in the fines.
Was anybody else fined during this period for this reason, work without a
For
permit?
work without permits?
Yeah,
Yes, that it happens frequently.
yeah. And that's my concern, is it just, it's similar to the other discussion we had. It just opens it up, and I would need to know more about some of those fees as well. Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, and this is for my last time. I certainly hear what you're saying, Councilmember Kelly. I do think we need to, again, my residents were hopping mad during that period where permits were slowed to an almost glacial pace, it felt like. And so, certainly I know we've added more staff to the department now. I think we need to continue to make investments and get better data. I'd love to have this come back, or not this, but have staff bring back, the system that you're using, and if it provides data on what the average time that it takes to issue a permit, and if we can look at some of that data and those metrics and work to reduce it. And, that's how I would approach it. And I'd love to also, if you want to make a referral, I've probably made enough referrals if somebody wants to make a referral to go through a process for forgiving certain fines. I'm happy to participate in those discussions as well. But I think it's important to have a solid policy in front of us and not just issue, forgiveness kind of on an ad hoc basis. Thank you.
Councilmember Kelly.
So yes, so I agree. I will support this with the understanding that I'm happy to write such a referral so that there is a clarity as to when this applies.
If I may, not all building that starts prior to a permit issuance is the fault of the city. Sometimes we send the information out where we're requesting additional information and we don't hear back from the person. In this particular case, they were communicating with staff. They were trying to find out what the permit process was and what the holdup was. Oftentimes, that's not the case. We send the email out saying the permit is approved. They start the work. We never hear from the person again, and that was not the situation here. They were responsive. They were trying to find out what was happening.
All right, we're going to do a roll call on this.
Councilmember Kelly,
Yes.
Councilmember Nusma,
No.
Councilmember Burns,
No.
Councilmember Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
No.
Councilmember Garrett Cars.
Yes.
That's a 3-3, so it goes to...
How about moves to council with a neutral recommendation?
3-3, neutral recommendation. This will move forward to council. Next up, we have item P2. Can someone move item P2?
I'll move item P2, approval of a vacation rental license for 2545 Lawndale Avenue.
Is there a second? Councilmember Sufferton, whose ward I believe this is in, requested that we table this. I don't know if we want to discuss it beforehand. I think there was a
I'll
issue.
move to table it.
Okay.
I think we can save the time.
Was that a?
That was,
Okay.
I move to table it.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of tabling this, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
All right, the ayes.
I'm sorry.
Did
I
you?
was daydreaming there. Let's table it.
So you're an aye?
Aye.
You're with the ayes?
I'm a table.
Okay. So this is tabled, and we'll figure out what meeting. Okay, so that's P2. Now items for discussion, we have item D1. Can someone,
I will move
Yes.
discussion of item D1, discussion on using a Fuse Executive Fellow to design a fellowship project for advancing equity through affordable housing program design.
All right, is there a second? All right, moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Kelly. We do have a presentation and someone from Fuse here to answer any questions, but we'll kick it off with Councilmember Reed.
We can go through the presentation first. My comments, I'm fully in support of this. I've had the pleasure of having a number of discussions with Councilmember Burns about this. It sounds like a wonderful idea and a wonderful use of our resources, and will allow us to build capacity. So I just give recognition for the leadership on this.
So we have the Director of Strategic Partnerships on the Zoom line, Nicole Richardson. And I believe she's going to share her screen.
Yes, I will. Let me try to do that now. Are you able to see my screen there?
Yes.
Brilliant. Let me get it on presentation mode. And good evening, everyone. I'm lovely to meet you all virtually anyway. And always glad to have Fuse on the agenda. I'm not only the Director of Strategic Partnerships now, but a few years ago I was a Fuse Fellow in Los Angeles County. We have had over 300 fellows do projects in cities and counties across the country. And it's really exciting to see some of the work they get to be involved in, how they are able to support, I should say we, as an alum of the program, and just what that is able to do to move forward projects in some of the some challenging areas and allow that support to really bring things to the community that are needed. So I will go through this presentation fairly quickly. I'll be mindful of time. Please feel free to let me know if there are any questions that it would be helpful for me to go in more in depth with. So one of the biggest kind of value adds to the Fuse Fellowship is that while we have projects and we will partner with cities and counties across the country, we do really look for talent from within. So we will not only look to find fellows who are local, but then we work with you to identify what are those projects, what are those challenges that you most want to address, and that this infusion of talent would help to advance. And so with that talent, with the scoping process that is figuring out what exactly do those projects need to look like, what is achievable within a year, but also challenging but achievable, we are able to help amplify some of that capacity, adding kind of an inside-outside lens to assess those projects, to think through some of the alternatives, some of the approaches, and then implement them as well. We have a very strong focus on equity, and particularly really from the beginning of Fuse, but I would say we've truly doubled down on this commitment in recent years, is making sure that not only are we addressing some of the main challenges that local governments have, but that we are doing so thinking about equity all along the way. And so, how are we able to help reduce some of the inequities that exist for local communities? You'll see here a quick kind of rundown of some of the places we've had partners, not everywhere, but it really does span the US, and we're excited to partner with more cities and counties as we go. And here are just a couple of our core issues. So while today we will be talking about housing, or this project really will focus on housing, we do work in a number of other areas where equity as a focus would be really supportive. So we start really by co-creating that project with you, which you all have done an amazing job of. And then once those projects are approved and within the cohort that they will be starting in, our team will start an executive search, and we do a separate executive search for each and every fellowship. So we don't just have kind of a cadre of fellows that we pull from. We make sure that we are finding the talent that is completely suited to addressing the issues and the challenges that you would like to face. The fellow will then come in and implement that project with a beginning phase that is trying to understand. We don't come in and say we know what the kind of issue or the implementation should be. We take a bit of time to understand the stakeholders, the factors, really understand the challenges. From there, starting to build what that strategy will look like and what that implementation will look like, and get buy-in from all of those stakeholders. Again, we've, as I mentioned, really focused and doubled down on ensuring that racial equity is at the helm of every project that we work on. So it's not kind of an additional or just one lens that we happen to look through, but we ensure that how are the projects at their base helping to ensure less inequities in communities all over the country. Just a few of our fellows there. So I will open it up to questions. I want to keep mine brief and make sure that I address the things that you may want to know more about.
All right, thank you. Nicole, opening up for questions. It might be a short night for you, Nicole. I don't think we have anything.
Not a problem at all. Happy to answer questions at a later time as well. But please know that we are here to support you in working through housing or some of the other issues and projects that you may want to look at. So I'm always available to answer questions as it may be helpful.
Councilmember Ravel.
Well, just a quick question. How long does it usually take you to recruit the ideal fellow for a particular project?
So because we work on a cohort model, we've kind of established a block of time. It's usually a couple of months. So our next cohort will begin in mid to late April. We will close kind of scoping the projects at the end of the year. That will give us about 2 months or so to find the right fit, to make sure that they accept the offer, that you all agree with that fit. Bring them on board, get them oriented, and then get them to start with you by mid to late April. The nice thing about that recruitment process is that you all are involved. So the department heads and the executive sponsor and project supervisor, terms that we use internally, but really mean who is on that team for your team. We make sure that those folks are involved and a key part of the recruitment so that you're really finding someone who's the right fit.
And just a point of clarity, Nicole, I was under the impression that we were a part of a cohort that will begin in October. Is there a?
My apologies.
Okay.
I'm always going through our
No,
different-
it's understandable.
our different cohorts.
We've kind of
Yeah.
teetered. The reason why
Yeah.
we've have this item on the agenda today is because I know there's a deadline coming up that we need to make. So I appreciate staff for getting this on the agenda with short notice. So I just wanted to clarify that this Fuse Fellow would start October, I believe.
Yes, and
Yes.
thank you for clarifying that. So this Fuse Fellow would start on Halloween, funny enough. And so we need to make sure that we have everything wrapped up, because once we do find that right fit, they are sometimes leaving something else because they are so passionate about supporting local government. And so we do want to make sure that from a contracting standpoint, from making sure that everything is in place to set that fellow up for success, that all happens well in advance of that October 31st start date. Thank you for mentioning that.
Councilmember Ravel, any other questions? You're good. Councilmember Nusma?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have questions for city staff. Where would we be taking the money from to pay for this? And how would this person interface with city staff, and what does that imply for our current staff? So I'm not sure who the right person is. Maybe Sarah Flax, it looks like.
Sarah Flax, Housing and Grants Manager. I actually worked with Councilmember Burns on trying to get some of the potential work a Fuse Fellow could do. The idea, as I understand it, is the Fuse Fellow would have a great deal of independence. This is a senior person, so wouldn't require the level of day-to-day supervision, but obviously would have to be thoroughly engaged with community development, housing staff, and others to be effective. in that role.
So does the addition of a Fuse Fellow lighten your load or allow us to accomplish more with the same, FTE city staff?
Well, we're in a situation right now where we're still trying to hire positions that we don't have filled. So
Right.
we're really very short-staffed right now. I actually, when we talked about Fuse Fellows, I thought an incredible use of a Fuse Fellow could be for our priority-based budgeting. That didn't move forward because I think that kind of level of independence and the equity lens that Fuse, I feel very strongly brings, would be very valuable to the city. So it's, I think we have a lot of things that are going on in housing right now to balance. And I think that one of the challenges is how to prioritize those and how to make sure that they are done effectively and get the results. If we have a Fuse Fellow, that's very, it's focused on, with an equity lens, which is on our lower income residents, and that is very important. And I personally was hoping that programs or projects could come out of that sort of work that would be funded through participatory budgeting. The Fuse Fellow position itself would come out of ARPA, but could come out of, we can look at the $900,000 that has been allocated for staffing and costs of managing. And we can also look at the revenue replacement, because in essence, that person is fulfilling somewhat of a staff function in many ways. But in addition to the Fuse project, we have two subcommittees or working, a subcommittee and a working group of this committee that is active. We have the Furman Pierce Cities project that we took on last fall. We have also applied for, and we don't know if we're going to get it, but I still think it's worth proceeding to see if we get it, a NYU Wagner, which is the public services graduate school of NYU for a what's known as a capstone project, which we submitted an application, Allison Leipzinger and I worked on, that we could get a 2-semester, so it's basically an academic year research program. And we've talked to Councilmember Burns about this. We got it a little better on track. We broadened it to cover the types of needs, the housing needs that our lower income people, especially our people of color and our African American population that is really at risk of being pushed out. What are the types of things they need? We've talked about services if they want to move out of their own house, say they're an owner occupant. The Here to Stay Committee has really come up with some really good ideas. And one of the things that we were hoping that this Wagner Capstone project could do is quantify the number of people that needed each of those types of services. One of the interesting things is ARPA is the first time I've ever seen in a federal funding stream that you can pay for property taxes, for example. And one of the most difficult things is when people are unable to pay their property taxes, it is a predatory system. And there's been articles on how it really hits our low and moderate income people and our families of color most. So there are a lot of different things. We know some people need rehab, and there are many projects being worked on for rehab, but we also know that there are people who need things like short-term help. Our mortgage and rent assistance programs are coming and going all the time. One of the biggest problems with the billions of dollars that have come out in that kind of assistance is it's rarely coordinated. We've also had, just situations where people can't figure out the applications because most of them are online. And so there are a lot of things where we know there may be some resources that in theory are there to help, but people can't access them. So it's really trying to figure out what are the greatest needs that is affecting this
And
particular
the
group.
Fuse Fellow helps us get to where we need to go.
Right, but how do these two things work together? And that's a question.
Figure that out.
The,
Okay, thank
if
you.
we get the capstone, that's a free thing.
Councilmember Kelly.
Just so I understand, so we don't really know how we would apply this position yet? Like, because you mentioned, I got a little bit concerned when I heard like the participatory budgeting, we've already allocated, I think, some money right to Northwestern to pay for that. I had one question about this. So when do we, I've seen postings for this position. But we haven't approved it yet. Yet it's posted. Is that par for course?
No, I think that was a little bit too energetic getting out ahead of, wasn't officially approved by anyone
Okay,
to
thank you.
post the position.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I see that Nicole Richardson has her hand up, maybe.
Oh, Nicole.
Yes, I just wanted to share around the recruiting. That's a great point. As I mentioned, we're on a cohort model. So to keep this position within this cohort, as the great point was made, we would need the time to make sure we found the right fit. What we do, because this happens frequently where our timing may not be the exact same as council's timing. So this comes up frequently. And the way we typically address it is we go ahead and say, okay, this sounds like the right project description. There is a project description written, that at least we can work from as a draft. Let's post that, make sure that we are getting interest, that we are ensuring that we will have some candidates and some really strong candidates for you. If for any reason it does not pass, we take it down. We inform the candidates that we won't be moving forward with it. If there is the ability or the interest to move forward at a later time, we will let them know that. But we really do manage those relationships with the candidates. So if for some reason that does happen, we do have a way of managing that. And I just wanted to kind of highlight the point made before. These are really executive level folks. So 15 plus years of experience, typically in management, executive leadership roles. And so what they are able to bring to the table kind of over and above a maybe college or graduate fellowship is being able to really at a high level help think through the strategy, think through the implementation, think through all of the stakeholder needs for that implementation, and then actually get to the implementation. And we've had cases where we've worked alongside other fellowship programs. In Baltimore, there's one starting now with Baltimore Core and a Fuse Fellow. So all of those things can work really nicely hand in hand.
Thank you, Nicole. Councilmember Ravel.
So I did spend quite a bit of time looking at the Fuse website, and they have really an impressive array of cities that they've helped and a number of really, and particularly in the area of housing. So I appreciate the appeal of this. I guess I do have some concerns, and we touched a little bit about that with Sarah about, what would be the impact of an additional major housing program along with all the other things we're trying to do. And in addition, I wrote down a few of them. Sarah's mentioned some, but we're in the midst of, as you know, working on whether to switch from a registration program to a licensing program. And if we do move to a licensing program, that's going to require a lot of work to really develop the ordinance and the whole. I envision that to be quite a bit of work.
And just so it's helpful, if you can, as you're going through the list, if you can reference the job description, which was provided in the packet, and say how the scope of work for this Fuse Fellow will conflict with each.
Well, I wouldn't say I don't think it's conflicting. It's just that we already have, I think, a very full plate of housing initiatives, and I worry that having a Fuse Fellow, because we don't want the Fuse Fellow working in a silo. We want the person to be.
Yeah, and they actually wouldn't. I was going to respond to that after everybody answer their questions, and it's not represented correctly in here. I'm not sure where the mistake was made, but there's an executive sponsor and a project supervisor for every Fuse Fellow, and the project supervisor would be Sarah Flax. So
Oh, my gosh.
the way
I'm sorry.
the way Sarah described it is this person is kind of this lone, whatever, working independently is true for the work, but they would still report to Sarah, right?
Right.
If
Well,
they
then
needed
that
to
adds.
loop into.
But so that adds to my concerns because I think Sarah has a very full plate already. So just to enumerate, so we're talking about, then we've got the subcommittee working on the three unrelated issue.
That doesn't have anything to do with, and that's why I really wanted you to reference this, because
Well, it has to do with.
it can get a little confusing when you.
It has to do with the fact of, I'm trying to talk about the housing initiatives that we are already committed to working on.
Right.
And I'm worried about, this is my concern, I'm just worried about another whole big project, housing project.
But what I'm saying, Councilmember Bell, and I just want this to be effective, because the list that you're saying, I sit on most of those committees and work closely on all those initiatives, and I very clearly understand the difference between each one of them. And so you can't, it's not helpful for the discussion to just have blanket kind of concerns. If you can reference how that conflicts with what this Fuse Fellow will be working on, or how it would make it difficult to move forward and pursue any of those things, then I could respond to it. But just like
Okay,
a
well,
blanket,
the
I'm
word-
concerned is not, I don't have anything to respond to.
Well, there are 24 hours in a day, and I just don't know how many, I don't know how to say it any differently than to say, I think Sarah has a very full load already, and if you're expecting her to be involved in working with this Fuse Fellow, I see that as adding more hours to her workday.
And Nicole can talk a bit more about this, but the 180 is not only for the salary, benefits, search, but executive coaching and training, because they're in a cohort. And so the benefit of using Fuse is that they're not working alone. They're working as part of a cohort system where there are Fuse Fellows across the nation who are, some of which are working in areas that are similar to what this Fuse Fellow will work on. And so the reason why I pointed out that Sarah would be technically the project supervisor is to say that this person would not get away from, would not fall out of alignment with what we're working on in these other areas. They would have a touch point here at the city in Sarah that could help, make sure that all these things were connected. In terms of more of the direct work of supervising, which I think you're talking about, is more so, I think, going to fall on the executive coach, which is built into this program.
I hear what you're saying. I still have a concern.
I get the concern. It doesn't.
And that, okay, and then
There's no additional FT hours on Sarah's part for this work, other than touching base with this person on whatever basis that Sarah will want to, in order to make sure it aligns with all the other work that we're doing. But again, this person would have an executive coach, would have a trainer, So, I mean, between now and the next time this comes up, if you could pinpoint, if even Sarah could provide how many additional hours she thinks this would require of her, then we can work off of that. And I think Nicole and the Fuse team could use some real world examples about how this has impacted city staff in other areas. And Nicole, I don't know if you could speak to that, if you've been following along with this.
I have,
Perfect.
and I'd be happy to. Oops, sorry. So maybe I'll just add in my personal experience as a Fuse Fellow, and then a bit of experience from others in other cohorts. So working with the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs in Los Angeles County, I was an executive fellow and looking to support how could the city make sure, and the county make sure, that everyone who is eligible for the earned income tax credit actually received it. Huge undertaking. Now, I was working within a department that was tasked by the Board of Supervisors to ensure that this happened. So that's where the oversight, the executive sponsor and the project supervisor came in to make sure that I wasn't coming up with solutions that were not possible within the context of Los Angeles County government. But what they weren't doing was sitting with me each and every day. I would kind of do my scoping, I would do my assessments, I would do my stakeholder interviews, and then come back with, here's the big picture of what I'm hearing. Does that sound right to you, given your knowledge of the county? And as they said, yes, this sounds right, keep going. If I got some, here's where we might need, a different perspective, it give me some additional contacts to continue those stakeholder interviews with. Because of the level of the executive fellows, you really are spending quite a lot of time independently thinking through the strategies, coming up with them, and ensuring that they make sense for all of the stakeholders. So the intent of bringing in the fellows is to take away time that the project supervisor and executive sponsor would be spending otherwise working on these same issues. For others who have worked on some infrastructure projects, things in health and housing, education, they have potentially been almost completely independent. And really it is the comfort level of the project supervisor and the executive sponsor and how well a match, the fellow is. So I would say one of the things that helps to take a lot of that time away from the project supervisor and executive sponsor is to make sure that those two roles and anyone else who's relevant is involved in the recruiting process. So that may add a few hours, anywhere between 4 and 8 hours within a specific delineated point of time for the recruiting process. Once that happens, if you've done a really good job at finding the right fit, and we've supported you in that, you can have someone who works very independently and takes, rather than adding to your plate, really takes away.
Who was first? I'm going to go Councilmember
Member Reed.
Reed.
Thank you. Councilmember Revelle, I certainly hear and understand your concerns. The workload with Sarah, I mean, Sarah has been forced to take on the work of maybe 3 or 4 people. I mean, becoming interim community development director, ARPA, your regular job, which is already a huge job. I understand that, but I do want to notice that, we're talking about October, the end of October, beginning of November when this person comes on. I would suspect by then, and maybe our city manager can give some insight on this, I would suspect by then we'd either have a new community development director coming on, or very near the point of coming on, and so some of that weight will be lifted from your plate, and as well as we need to make hires in the department anyhow, and so there will be just a necessity to oversee more staff than what's being overseen now. So I do think. If that is the main concern, which is a very caring and a valid concern, that that should be alleviated by the time we get to this point.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that fundamentally this is a capacity building initiative, and so to add staff where we have shortages, I think is important, and I'll talk a bit more about that after Councilmember Kelly. Go ahead.
So it sounds very interesting. I also want to second some of Councilmember Revelle's concerns. I think we all know delegating is a tremendous amount of work. I think oftentimes people think by adding a position and, we're assured that because Sarah Flex will be the project supervisor, that, it'll be additional help. Well, I think I am also very concerned about managing that. And we want to assure we're spending $180,000, that there's accountability. So I don't think I think it is going to be a considerable amount of work. I also, I think the program sounds wonderful, but I'd like to see more specificity to it. I've looked at, I think, Nashville and Oakland, a few others. I just am not saying, I'd love to see some specific outcomes from projects, like if there are housing projects, maybe if you could bring this back with a list of some of the specific outcomes from work in other cities. I think that would be helpful to have a better idea as to what we could imagine or potentially consider having done here through this program. Thank you.
And I just wanted to be clear that the deliverables for this project are in the packet. And Nicole, in terms of deliverables and other projects, we can, would you be able to provide that?
Yes, absolutely.
meetings.
I
Thank
can
you.
share a few links from the website that go, just kind of briefly into some of the achievements of Fuse Fellows. I can also send some longer documents, so we can chat after about what would be most appropriate.
And also just want to be clear that Sarah, along with Sue Loback and others, participated in 3 scoping discussions, maybe even 4, but I know for sure it was 3 scoping discussions. And we used the input from that group to create this job description, which is why, again, if folks have very specific pinpoint concerns, I think we can respond to them. Councilmember Revelle.
Well, I have one more question for Ms. Richardson. Both the website and the packet talk about the possibility of this being 1 or 2 year program. How often is it a 2 year? Is the fellow working with the community for 2 years?
So we always start as 1 year. What 1 year allows the fellows to do is have a bit of a sense of urgency, as well as the host. So we start every project off as 1 year. If the host and the fellow feel this was the right fit and there is enough work that kind of comes out of and continues on from what the fellow started in year 1, there's funding, there is the appetite to continue, we will work with you to scope a second year, an extension to that. It's probably about, and I'll check the numbers, but I'm guessing about 40-60, 50-50 that a second year is taken on. I did not do a second year in mine because it was the perfect transition point to where the strategy that I had developed and begun to implement, I brought the entire team, the kind of team that was under my project supervisor, along with me for the entire implementation. And so it was the perfect handoff point when my year was up. For others who have, again, worked on infrastructure and been able to help the city of LA get multi-million-dollar deals and make sure that infrastructure was built out, there was additional work and they were a huge asset. So they either were able to extend for a second year. Others have become embedded as full-time staff into cities and counties. Others will then go on to consulting and supporting cities and counties in other ways. But there's really a myriad of ways that could continue. But each and every time it starts with a 1 year commitment.
Councilmember Hedikadis.
Hi, I just wanted to weigh in. I think this is an exciting opportunity to build capacity with our staff. It sounds like in some other cases, those fellows also maybe stay on wherever they're working. So I think this would be an exciting thing to explore further.
Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I think we're nearing the end of this conversation. I just want to, just acknowledge the amount of, time and thought and work that went into this. As Councilmember Burns said, I was on that call with Sarah Fleck, Sue Lowellback, 2 folks from the Fuse Corp, Robbie Marcus, other folks were on that call. And so these are, and I don't know, I feel like I'm on so many calls. I feel like Angel might have been there as well. Maybe I'm mistaken on that one. But we had, a considerable amount of thought going into this. I appreciate the support. I appreciate Councilmember Burns' leadership on this to really solve an issue that primarily impacts, it impacts everyone, but affordable housing is really an issue that impacts, residents of the 5th Ward, the 8th Ward, and, the 2nd Ward as well, more so than other folks around the city. Or I can phrase that even better, particularly impacts Black and brown folks in our city. And I think that this Fuse Corp fellow will allow us to build capacity, will allow us to do things that our city staff traditionally is not able to do because of the, all of the other stuff that's on their plate already. And building this capacity is going to be key for us getting metrics and data that we can point to really move the ball forward on working to mitigate the affordable housing crisis that we're in. So I'm hoping that, when this comes back around, folks will have answers to their questions. Again, because of that meeting, I had a great opportunity to hear about some of the deliverables that Fuse Corp has provided to municipalities in the past. I'm sure once folks get that information, folks will be just as excited about this as people who are already excited about it. So looking forward to this coming back for an actual vote.
And I just wanted to add that really all of our efforts, whether it's the working group, the subcommittee, really is focused on very specific policy changes around affordable housing. And then there was a committee that was created by the previous administration that I think largely their work was disrupted by COVID, but there was a possibility that they would create an affordable housing plan. Sarah, if I'm getting that right. And so this has been a really important priority of mine, being that, over 50% or right at 50% of folks living in the area that is traditionally thought of when people think of the Fifth Ward, which is at 8092 Census Tract, are housing insecure. And so because of that, I'm chairing the working group. I sit on the subcommittee, and I speak with Sarah and other affordable housing advocates and leaders in the Chicago area on a regular basis. And so I'm keeping track not only of what we're doing, but what other people are doing. And I think probably out of anybody on the council, I probably have the strongest sense of when we're duplicating efforts and when we're not. And I can tell you with this, we're not. This is really looking at what can we do as the city of Evanston to increase our effort and our infrastructure towards addressing our affordable housing issue that we all talk about during campaigns and year round, but we haven't changed our effort, our city effort towards it. And you can see that because, and I've talked to Sarah even about this is where we agree that the city has never had a housing division or department. Sarah has become that default person, but Sarah is a housing and grants manager, right? Fundamentally, that's what she does. It's a compliancy position that's ensuring that we continue to get home funds and CDBG funds, et cetera. And I think over the years, we have, we feel as though that she is someone that her core position focuses on housing planning and policy, but that's not the case. From speaking with Sarah, I think at one point we had a housing manager maybe or supervisor. There was one position that I think we had as a city, but never a division, never a department. And so I think fundamentally what this is trying to look at is what are other cities doing, not how other cities are supporting like the overall affordable housing infrastructure, because we're still always going to need connections for the homeless and some of our other organizational partners. But is there a greater effort that can come from the city of Evanston to help lead on this issue, to make sure that a decade from now, we're not still looking at the same housing insecure numbers, which we've been looking at the last 10, 20 years, if not more. And so again, this is fundamentally about what can the city do to provide a greater effort in this fight, because we're losing, and we're losing badly, and it's happening year over year without much change. And I think, as Nicole said earlier, that if we do end up getting if we do up winning the, I can't remember what university it was, but the graduate program, what is it? The NYU, and we can bring on those graduate programs. Fuse has partnered with other fellowship programs in the past, and we need as many people working on this issue as possible. It's a big issue, and we're all aware of. So I just wanted to add that as a closing comment. So I think we know what we need to bring to the next meeting. In between this meeting and the next one, please feel free to share any other specific, questions or concerns that you have, and we can work on getting you responses in the next, hopefully, week or two. Like, I want you to have this in advance. So after you get that information, you can send any follow-up concerns or questions. So please, in the next 48 to 72 hours, if you have any concerns or questions that we haven't identified today, please forward those to me. Okay, I think that is our last item for today. So we will, I don't think we have any items for communication. All right, so seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.